Hello friends, welcome back to the next session on Service Operations Management. Now let's begin with our learning. In this particular session, we'll be understanding and dealing with the concepts of insights of data analysis, the learning objectives. At the end of this particular session, the learners will be able to understand what do we mean by insights of data analysis, what is the importance of the insights of data analysis? And lastly, what are the various activities that have been undertaken while preparing or while getting the insights of data analysis? Now let's begin with our learning. First, we'll understand what do we mean by data and what is its importance. In a business organization or a service industry, whenever we deal or we consume the goods, services, and products, whenever we deliver any services to the customers, we always have to collect and we always have the certain amount of data that has been available. So data is just a information or the raw information that has been collected from the different people or from different sources. When we conduct a certain research on the basis of data that has been collected, the hypothesis is been tested and the findings are being found. So the data is, in simple terms, it means an information which has been collected from various sources. Maybe it primary data or maybe it secondary data. So collecting of data, that is collecting of information, is essentially important in the business organization for characterizing, calibration, verification, validation, and assessment. That is for day-to-day operational activities for the short-term as well as long-term planning, decision making, and so on. Data plays a very important role. And always, data is a durable concept wherein once data is being collected, it can be acted or it can act as a beneficial to the organization in the long run. And hence, data acts as a validation perspectives also. There are various models through which data analysis and interpretation can be undertaken. And hence, when we say that there is no amount of enough data that is available, the validation, the analysis, and interpretations cannot be done. And hence, importance of data is essentially necessary and useful, which helps us to bring out various perspectives and undertake a better decision making. Now let us understand how do we get the insights from data. In order to get the various insights from the data, first we need to do is we need to define the problem or we need to identify and frame the hypothesis. Hypothesis is just mere a statement wherein its proposition or its validity can be tested and it may be true or it may be false. And hence the hypothesis is a statement which we are trying to test. A particular statement that has been made and accordingly on the basis of information that we have collected, on the basis of data that we have gathered, the hypothesis has been tested. And hence, defining the problem or defining the hypothesis is essentially important. Now, further, we also have to consider the stakeholders and the scope of analysis. That is, for what purpose the data is being collected, for what reason we are collecting or analyzing those particular data, and what is the purpose of our analysis. And hence, defining the scope of or defining and identifying the scope and analysis of data is essentially important. And it acts as an insights or an information about why we are conducting a certain activity or a certain research. The data that is been collected, it acts as a measure of relevance data and conduct basic analysis to spot the anomalies. So in order to spot the anomalies as to why we are conducting a particular study, what will be the usages, what will be the outcomes, and what will be the suggestions, all these questions have been answered only when the data can be collected in a very better and effective way. So once the data that is we are trying to looking for and that we are collecting is very correct and accurate, then on those particular basis, the relevant data can be analyzed and the basic analysis can be undertaken in order to spot the anomalies and come to a certain conclusion, which is always concrete and definite. It also helps to analyze the correlations and patterns and put our statistics and visualization skills to work. So when we collect the data from various sources, may it be a primary data or maybe it was secondary data, we can correlate and accordingly prepare the pattern or a series of data. That is, whether the data is increasing, whether the data is decreasing, and whether it is scattered, non-scattered, structured, unstructured, and so on. And hence, from those particular perspectives, we can identify and understand which type of data we are collecting. Secondary, the visualization is also very effective and possible on the basis of data that we are collecting, either for the short-term period or either for the long-term period. And hence, insights from the data can be easily undertaken and identified on the basis of what type of data we are collecting and how those analysis of tools and techniques can be applied. Now let us understand what do we mean by an insight and what is the definition of an insight. So insight is defined as a comprehensive grasp of a certain situation, or maybe it a person, maybe it a thing. So in context of it data and analytics, the term insight refers to an analyst or business who uncover the previously unknown patterns in data or link between the variables. So in simpler terms, data and in terms of a data analysis, insight simply means a comprehensive or an overall grasp of a certain situation. So when we collect the data from a certain a person or a certain individual or from the group of individuals, we need to come down to a certain conclusion or a situation wherein this particular data should be always of an holistic nature. So bringing in a comprehensive and a holistic approach to grasp a certain situation. That is, in order to come to a certain conclusion at a very specific point, the method that we are adopting, it's called as an insights of data. The data that is now, for example, let's take a statement wherein the percentage of shareholding in Hindustan Unilever is 50% by the Indian customers or the Indian shareholders or the Indian investors. Now here in this case, what we can come to a conclusion or the insights that can be created from the data is 50% of shareholding, out of which out of 100% and of the Indian customers or the Indian stakeholders or the Indian investors. So out of the 100% investors which are spread across the globe, 50% investors or 50% stakeholders in Hindustan Unilever are Indian people. So these are the various insights. Insights as to the percentage, that is 50%, the region as to the Indian people, the category or class as to the stakeholders or the investors, and so on. So in this way, various insights can be drawn from a single statement. And when we draw the various consensus from the single statement, then we can say that a comprehensive grasp of a certain situation or a particular person or a particular thing can be analyzed. And that's the concept of insights. Now let's understand what are the various tips for creating the insights. Number one, the first tip for creating the insights is identifying and clarifying the real situation. So before we begin or before we create a certain insights, we must clearly define and identify what is the real question, where does the problem lie, and hence it is very essential and necessary to find out what is the problem statement and how have we framed the hypothesis. So framing of hypothesis or defining a particular statement is very essentially important, and only on those particular basis, the further study, analysis, and collection of data can be undertaken. The second tip for creating the insights is finding out what is known and what is available. So in this particular case, when we need to do always a smart work, we must always find out what data is already available, and that on that particular basis, what analysis we can make and what is not available. So on the basis of what we know and what is available, only those things should be avoided, and the thing that is not known and which is not available, we should always try to work on those particular perspectives, and hence it tries to save our energy, money, time, resources, and so on. And hence the data gives you a clear insight about what is available with us and what is known to us. And on the basis of data collection, various tools and techniques, we try to collect only that particular data which is not known and which is not available with us. And hence creating an insight or having a better insights will give you a clear understanding about what is available with you and what is known to you. Finding out what people expect the results to be. So here in this case, there comes the scenario of forecasting. So on the basis of certain analysis or a pre-research that we are undertaking, we can identify and come to a conclusion that what are the results the people are expecting. So on the basis of those pre-expected results, we can easily identify that what conclusions can be drawn in the long run. And hence the data that we have at a fresh hand consideration or a pre data collected with an available of published records will give you an insight about what data can be collected in the short run and what data can be collected or will be made available in the long run. And hence the forecasting as to the results, the generation of revenues in the business organization, and what prospective results can be there or can arise can be clearly understood with the help of data insights which can be applicable in the business situations. Knowing whether your results are good news or the bad news. So with the help of data insights, or when we create an insights about the data, we can clearly understand about what the data that we have collected will provide the good news for you, or it may provide a bad news for you. On those particular suggestions or on those particular basis, we can always create our plan of action. We can always work on it. And on those particular basis, a clear understanding of those goods, services, and commodities can be undertaken. And hence, knowing the results is very essentially important, and a predetermined or destined results can be easily identified on the basis of data insights that are being created. Now let's understand what the 5 principles of insights definition. The first principle of the insight definition is setting the context. Next is communicating the dilemma. The third is the articulating the why question. The fourth is the capture the motivation, and fifth is envision the ideal. So number one, setting the context, wherein we have to set the goal, we have to set the target, we have to define the problem, and we have to frame the hypothesis. So this is the first insight definition, in which we need to identify what work we are going to undertake, what is the purpose of this particular study, and what are we aiming at. Secondly, communicating the dilemma. So accordingly, the question, the hypothesis, the problem, the definition that has been set, we need to communicate to the different peoples and the individuals that what we are trying to aim for, and what do we need to communicate, and what we need to collect. And hence, communication is essentially important, and only on those particular basis, we can make a series or plan of action, and all the activities can be conducted in a very well coordinated way. Articulating the why question. So answering this particular question as to why is essentially important. That is the purpose, motive, or objective of conducting this particular study. That is why data is being collected and how the data will be helpful for the organization in the long run. Capturing the motivation. So here, capturing the motivation is essentially important, on the basis of which one can come to a conclusion as to why the data has been collected, what will be the benefits out of it, and what the organization as well as we individual participants will be getting benefited from those activities. And hence, capturing the motivation is essentially necessary. And lastly, envision the ideal. So accordingly, envision the ideal is essentially necessary, because we need to communicate the results that has been observed. Whatever learnings or the inputs that we have taken from the study that was being undertaken is essentially important. And only when the data that is being collected have a proper insights about what we are collecting, how it can be made applicable, then we can go ahead with the insights that can be created in the business organizations. Now let us understand what are the various stages of insight. The first stage of insight is knowledge of mind and body. So initially, we need to think to ourselves, and accordingly, the knowledge of mind and body is essentially important. And only on those particular basis, the insight or thinking power or the comprehensive approach can be developed. The second perspective or the stage of insight is knowledge of cause and effect. So always, when there is a certain cause, there is an effect for those considerations. So cause and effect relationship follows hand in hand, and it follows together. So having a knowledge of cause and effect relationship is essentially important, and only on those particular basis, insights can be developed, that what will be the cause if a certain effect is being undertaken, and what will be the effect if a certain cause is being arised. And hence, that particular perspective or the inputs are necessary, required. Knowledge of the 3 characteristics. So 3 characteristics as to the mind, body, soul, cause, effect, and so on. So with depending on the individual perspective, depending on the data that we are collecting, and all the factors that have been employed for creation and collection of data, we need to analyze what characteristics are better to the organization, whether a particular situation is average, neutral, beneficial, non-beneficial, and so on. And hence, knowledge of characteristics of an individual, characteristics of data, characteristics of a person's market situations, and so on, or data that we have collected is essentially important. Knowledge of the arising and passing. So arising, wherein if a particular situation arises, till what duration it will last or it will go on, and when this particular situation will pass up. So having the knowledge or information about the beginning and the end of a certain consideration or scenario is essentially important, and only on those particular basis, the stages or the proper insights can be undertaken. The knowledge of suffering. Suffering in the sense, what is the cycle or the time duration for a certain activity that is being undertaken. So identification of cycle or the time duration is essentially necessary, so that we can understand what will be the impact either in the short run period or either in the long run period. The knowledge of suffering as to the re-observation. So according on the basis of suffering that we have observed, we need to again re-observe as to what may be the changes that can be incorporated on the basis of impact on mind and body, cause and effect, characteristics applicability, arising and passing. So when a particular cycle is being undertaken, there is a continuous flow or series of activities in the business organization, continuous delivery of services to the individual customers, then what is the knowledge or impact of suffering on the observations as well as on the re-observations. Now let us understand how do we identify the various insights. So identification of various insights is essentially important, and one of the most efficient strategy to achieve insight is to combine the facts and observations. These particular facts and observations can be collected either from the first-hand information, that is on the basis of primary data, or on the already published data, that is the second-hand information, which is also called as secondary data. So on the basis of fact observation, which we as an individual perspectives, we collect from the general public on the basis of surveys, questionnaires, observations, and so on, that particular insights can be developed in a very better way. Or on the basis of various standard published data, which is already or readily available, we can have a better insights on the data that we are collecting. So a quantitative research always focuses on well-known fact that your luggage travels apart from you. So always we have to see that our luggage is always carrying with you, and you have a proper data insights for the collection of information in the business organization. Now, how to write an impactful insight. So here is a certain example or certain steps for writing a better or impactful insights. Stating the context and background. So accordingly, whatever we are undertaking, whatever activity or framing of problem or defining of problem and framing of hypothesis has been undertaken, we need to state the context and background information in a very correct way. And only then the insights can be developed in an excellent way. Explaining what you have learned. So our previous learning needs to be explained in a better consideration, and only on those particular basis, we need to explain as to what we have learned from the previous or the earlier situations and what we look to aim for further. Articulating the root cause, that is the why question. So what is the root cause of this particular problem and why this particular problem has arisen or it has occurred? On the basis of the root cause, we need to find a certain solution, and only on those particular perspectives, the various steps can be initiated, it can be identified, wherein you need to collect the data, and accordingly, you need to find the insights as to the comprehensive approach for the data collection. Talking about the motivation. So what motivation factors is been arising, and on which basis the motivation is been acted to an individual for collecting a certain data and accepting the inputs that have been provided in a business organization. And hence, talking about motivation is essentially important and necessary. Communicating the consequences, and hence communicating the consequences to the individual, to the participants, to the stakeholders, and whosoever is been related with the data collection and information is necessary and important for the organization. And hence communicating the consequences is also a step that needs to be undertaken for creating or writing a better impactful insights. And lastly, if necessary, recommending the next steps. So when all these particular steps or process or activities are being undertaken, we must surely try to recommend what steps needs to be implemented, how those particular solutions can be undertaken in the business organization, and in the long run, how the business organization can sustain for a better data insights. And hence, recommending the next steps is also sometimes recommended or suggested. So the ability to perceive or grasp something clearly is been defined as a data analytics and the data insights, which is typically helping the intuition. So in the long run or in the short run, it is very necessary to see that how do we read a particular person, how do we collect the information, and how that particular information collected is been stored. Understanding a computer, how does a computer works is an example of an insight. So when we say that an insight is being needed, we need to understand as to how do we analyze a particular situation and how do we implement our intuition sense. So applicability of all these six senses to understand a certain scenario is essentially important. The data insights are the results of companies' analysis of collection of various data, facts, informations, and so on. So when you look at a particular graph or a particular bar diagram or a particular chart, we come to a conclusion as to whether the statistics are increasing, whether the statistics decreasing, or whether it is stable, and so on. So these are analysis that is based on the insights that we have. That is, if a particular data is being at an increasing stage, then we can say that the company is in a good financial position or at a better stage. And in this way, vice versa, we can come to a conclusion if the performance of the organization is not good. And hence, the insights of data gives you a certain understanding about educating yourself and educating the others for creating a better insights of the reducing the risk that is being associated in a business organization. Now let's summarize what we have learned in this particular session. In this particular session, we have understood what do we mean by the importance of data, what are the various benefits of data record and maintenance, and what are the various insights of data that can be undertaken in the business organization. And hence, the insights of data is essentially important in the short run as well as in the long run. I hope you must have enjoyed the learning in this particular session. We'll stay connected and we'll continue with our learning. Thank you for your patience listening. Thank you.